Some men come home from war to parades. Some come home to nothing. I came home to a locked door and a woman who didn't answer her phone. And I'm still deciding which of those is worse. My name is James Walker. I'm 45 years old. I was born and raised in a two-story colonial on Harwell Drive in the Kirkwood neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia, the east side of the city. The kind of neighborhood where people sit on front porches in the evenings and everybody's grandmother knows everybody else's grandmother. My parents, Charles and Ruth Walker, have lived in that house since 1978. Charles spent 30 years as a mechanical technician at the Ford assembly plant in Hapeville before retiring in 2010. Ruth worked as a school nurse at Toomer Elementary on 2nd Avenue for 22 years. They are, in the plainest possible terms, the most decent people I have ever known in my life. It took me until I was 45 years old and standing on their porch at 2 in the morning on a bad leg to fully understand that. Let me start where it actually started, not with the Army, with Nicole. Nicole Reeves and I grew up 6 blocks apart in Kirkwood. She was the kind of girl who made a whole neighborhood stop and look, not because she was showy about it, but because she wasn't. She was quiet and sharp and laughed at things other people missed. We had known each other since middle school at Cohen Middle School on Dodd Avenue, drifted apart in high school, and found each other again at a 4th of July cookout in 2009, when I was 30 and she was 29. We dated for 4 years. She became the fixed point my whole life organized around. We married on June 8, 2013, at Lullwater Park in Decatur, a small, green, genuinely beautiful spot on the east side of the Atlanta metro. 40 guests. A string quartet, Nicole in a cream dress that her mother had altered by hand. I wore my good suit. My mother cried through the ceremony. My father shook my hand afterward with both of his and said, "You did right, son." 6 weeks later, I enlisted in the United States Army. I want to be clear about why, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was 35, newly married, and working a mid-level warehouse logistics job at a distribution center in Conley that paid decently but had no ceiling. I wanted to build something real. The Army offered a signing bonus, a salary, full benefits, and a path toward the kind of financial stability that a logistics job in Conley was never going to provide. Nicole and I had discussed it, at length, over several weeks, at the kitchen table of the apartment we were renting on Memorial Drive in Kirkwood. She was not thrilled. But she understood. She said she'd wait. She said she loved me. She said we'd build the life when I got back. I reported to Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina, in late August 2013 for basic combat training. I was, at 35, older than most of the men in my training unit by nearly a decade. My drill sergeant, a compact, iron-jawed man from rural Louisiana named Staff Sergeant Delroy Thibodeau, took one look at me and said, "Walker, you better not be slow." I was not slow. I graduated BCT in November 2013 and completed advanced individual training in January 2014 as a 92A automated logistical specialist. Supply chain management, the Army version of what I'd been doing in the civilian world, except with significantly more people yelling at you. My first duty station was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. I was there from early 2014 until my first deployment to Afghanistan in late 2015. From the day I left for Fort Jackson in August 2013, I sent money home to Nicole every month. Not a portion of my pay, most of my pay. I was living on base, eating on base, wearing what the Army gave me. My living expenses were minimal. So I sent Nicole $2,800 a month for the first 2 years. When I got promoted to specialist and then to corporal, the allotment went up. By 2019, I was sending home $3,400 a month. Over 10 years, the total came to somewhere north of $370,000. I want you to hold that number. It becomes important later. Nicole's end of our long-distance marriage looked like this, as far as I could tell from phone calls and the occasional video chat. She continued working at her job as an office manager at a medical billing company on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. She handled the bills. She maintained our joint bank account. She sent photos of the apartment, then later of a house she said she'd been looking at, then photos of the house she said she'd put an offer on with our savings. A 3-bedroom Craftsman on Marlow Road in Decatur, which I had never seen in person but which Nicole sent me a full photo tour of in the summer of 2018. It looked beautiful. It looked like a life waiting to be lived. I had been deployed to Afghanistan twice and Kuwait once in those 10 years. Between deployments, I had taken leave and come home. Twice in 2016, once in 2018, a longer stretch in 2020 when my unit was in a stateside rotation. Those visits were good. Not perfect. There was always the weight of impending separation, and Nicole had developed a life of her own that I was a guest in rather than a partner to. But warm enough. Present enough. I told myself that was what military marriages looked like, that we'd find each other again properly when I came home for good. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was most wrong about that. On September 3rd, 2023, during a training exercise at Fort Campbell, not combat, not overseas, just a domestic exercise that nobody was supposed to get hurt on, a vehicle rollover on a wet gravel road left me with a fractured tibia, torn ligaments in my right knee, and a concussion that put me in the hospital at Blanchfield Army Community Hospital on Fort Campbell for 11 days. After stabilization, I was transferred to the Warrior Transition Battalion, a unit specifically designed to support soldiers through medical recovery and eventual medical separation or retirement processing. By late November 2023, I had been medically separated from the U.S. Army after 10 years and 4 months of service. I was 44 years old. I walked, slowly, with a cane, because the leg was still healing, out of Fort Campbell with a Department of Defense disability rating, a service record I was proud of, and a bus ticket to Atlanta. I called Nicole from the bus station in Clarksville, Tennessee before I boarded. She picked up on the fourth ring. "I'm coming home," I told her. "I'll be at the house on Marlow Road by tonight." A pause. "Tonight? I caught an earlier bus. I wanted to surprise you." Another pause. Longer. "James, I'm not, this isn't a great time." The particular weight of those words. Not a great time for the man who'd been sending money home for 10 years. Not a great time. "Nicole, I'm medically separated. I'm coming home. I'll see you tonight." I hung up. I got on the bus. The house on Marlow Road in Decatur was everything the photos had suggested. A neat craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street, deep green shutters, a front porch with 2 chairs. It was 9:47 p.m. when the cab dropped me at the curb. The lights were on inside. Someone was home. I went to the front door with my cane and my duffel bag and I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Louder. "Nicole, it's James." A light moved behind the curtain of the front window. Someone looking out. Then stillness. I took out my phone and called her number. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. I stood on the porch of a house I had paid for, a house I had never slept a single night in, and listened to my wife's voicemail greeting. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "I'm at the front door. Please open it." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then, "James, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry." I stood on that porch for 20 minutes. I knocked twice more. I called twice more. The lights inside eventually went off, one by one, the way lights go off in a house where someone is hoping you'll take the hint and leave. I took the hint. I wasn't going to beg at a door. I called a cab from the porch steps. I sat on the top step with my duffel bag and my cane and my broken leg and waited in the Decatur night, and I did not let myself think too hard about any of it yet, because there was only so much a man could absorb at one time, and I had reached my limit for the evening. I didn't know it yet, but what I was about to find out about the money, and about Nicole, would make the locked door look like the least of it. I told the cab driver to take me to Kirkwood. I gave him the address on Harwell Drive. It was past 10:30 at night, and showing up at my parents' door without warning was not something I had planned. But I had nowhere else to go, and somewhere below the shock and the exhaustion and the pain in my leg was the oldest navigation instinct a person has. Go home. The cab pulled up to the Colonial on Harwell Drive at 11:15. The porch light was off. The neighborhood was quiet. I paid the driver, took my duffel bag and my cane, and walked up the front path. I knocked. Soft. First. Then harder. A light came on upstairs. Then on the porch. Then the door opened. My mother, Ruth Walker, stood in the doorway in her housecoat. 67 years old, with the expression of a woman whose instincts had just been confirmed by a sight she'd been half dreading for 10 years. She looked at me, at the cane, at the leg, at the face I was wearing, which I imagine was not my best. And she didn't ask a single question. She just opened the door wider and said, "Come inside, James." My father appeared at the top of the stairs a minute later. Charles Walker, 69 years old, broad-shouldered and gray-haired and moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who had learned not to rush at his age. He came down the stairs and looked at me in the hallway under the light, and something passed across his face that I hadn't seen there before. Not pity. Something older and more complicated than pity. "Son," he said, "let's get you sat down." My mother made tea. My father pulled a kitchen chair close and examined my leg with the practical attention of a man who'd spent 30 years fixing mechanical things and understood that the first step was always to understand the damage. He asked me what the doctors had said. He asked about the injury timeline. He asked about my medications. He asked whether I'd eaten. Not once, in that first hour, did either of them ask about Nicole. They already knew something. I could feel it, but they were waiting for me to be ready. I wasn't ready that night. I let my mother put me in my old room at the top of the stairs, the same room I'd slept in as a teenager, smaller than I remembered, with the same curtains my mother had hung in 2003, and I lay on that narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and let the weight of the day press down on me until I was under it. The morning after a disaster always comes with unreasonable sunlight. I woke up in my childhood bedroom on Harwell Drive to the smell of coffee and my father's voice downstairs, and for about 4 seconds I didn't remember why I was there. Then I remembered. Ruth had made breakfast. Eggs, grits, sliced tomato, the way she'd made breakfast my entire childhood. Charles was at the kitchen table with his coffee and the newspaper reading glasses on, moving through the sports section with the unhurried calm of a retired man who has earned his mornings. I sat down. My mother set a plate in front of me and sat across from me, and we ate for a few minutes in silence. Then Charles took off his glasses and folded the newspaper and set it aside. He looked at me steadily. "You want to tell us what happened? All of it?" I told them about the injury, the Warrior Transition Battalion, the medical separation, the bus from Clarksville to Atlanta, the house on Marlowe Road, the locked door, the lights going off. My parents listened without interrupting. Ruth's hands were folded on the table. Charles's jaw was set in the particular way it got when he was processing something that made him angry, but was choosing not to lead with the anger. When I finished, Charles nodded once. Then, quietly, "How much do you know about the account?" I looked at him. What account? He and Ruth exchanged a look, the kind that married people exchange when they've been discussing something for a while and have been waiting for the right moment to open it. "We've been seeing things," Ruth said carefully. "From Nicole. Things she's said when she's called here." "Nicole calls here?" "She called your father twice this year," Ruth said. "Once in February, once in August. She was checking whether we'd heard from you, whether you were planning to come home soon." A pause. She seemed anxious. Both times. Nicole had been calling my parents to track my timeline, not out of concern, out of calculation. "What things have you been seeing?" I asked. Charles went to the sideboard by the kitchen window and came back with a manila folder. He set it on the table between us. "We don't have everything," he said, "but a neighbor of Nicole's, a woman named Sandra who goes to Ruth's church, mentioned to Ruth back in April that the house on Marlowe Road had had a lot of work done on it lately. New kitchen, back deck, new vehicle in the driveway that Sandra didn't recognize." I looked at the folder. Inside were 3 printed pages, bank statements from our joint account that Ruth had apparently requested copies of after adding herself as an authorized contact years ago, a detail I had apparently set up before my first deployment and forgotten. She had only requested the last 6 months' worth. The account balance in the most recent statement was $4,200. I stared at that number. The account had over $40,000 in it when I left on the last rotation. I said, "I checked it in August." "We know," Charles said. Sandra also mentioned that Nicole had been seen around the neighborhood with someone, regularly, for most of this year. The kitchen was very quiet. I closed the folder. I looked at my hands flat on the table. $43,000, gone in 3 months, and a door that didn't open. I need a lawyer, I said. I already called Stephen Watts, Charles said immediately. He's at a firm on Peachtree Center Avenue. He's expecting your call this morning. My father had called a lawyer before breakfast. He'd been ready for this conversation before I knocked on the door. How long have you known something was wrong? I asked him. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I should have said something sooner. But you were deployed, James, and I didn't have proof. I had a feeling and a neighbor's observations and a wife who didn't want to worry you. He glanced at Ruth. We should have said something. I'm sorry we didn't. 69 years old, my father, apologizing to me at the breakfast table for not finding a way to protect me across 10,000 miles. I didn't know what to do with that kind of love. I called Stephen Watts at 9 that morning from the kitchen table. Stephen was a family and civil attorney in his mid-50s, recommended by a friend of Charles's from the Ford plant days, and he had the careful, deliberate manner of a man who had heard a great many financial betrayal stories and was not going to waste time being shocked by another one. I told him the full picture, the 10 years of allotments, the approximate total sent home, the joint account balance I'd last seen in August, the current $4,200 balance, the house on Marlow Road that I'd never lived in. Stephen took notes and asked the right questions. Were you listed on the mortgage for the Marlow Road property? He asked. I don't know. Nicole handled the purchase. I assumed my name was on it. That's the first thing we check. Pull your credit report today. You can do it free at annualcreditreport.com and look for any mortgage liability in your name. If your name is on the deed, you have property rights. If it isn't, we have a different conversation. I pulled my credit report on Charles's laptop that afternoon. My name was on the mortgage. Nicole had needed both incomes to qualify, so my name was there, which meant I had an interest in the property I had never set foot inside. She had used my name to buy the house. She just hadn't bothered to let me live in it. Stephen also confirmed what I suspected about the bank account. Under Georgia law, funds in a joint marital account are considered marital property, and the unilateral depletion of a joint account, particularly when one spouse is absent on military service, would be treated as dissipation of marital assets in divorce proceedings. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, meaning the court divides marital property fairly, not necessarily equally, but with consideration for each spouse's contributions. 10 years of financial contributions totaling over $370,000 would weigh heavily in that calculation. What do you want the outcome to be? Stephen asked. I want a divorce, I told him, and I want what I'm owed. Then we'll get it. Come to my office on Thursday. While the legal wheels began turning, my parents got me into medical care. Charles drove me to the Charlie Norwood VA Medical Center on Augusta Road in Decatur on Tuesday morning, one of the Atlanta area VA facilities that serves veterans in the metro region. The VA system has its challenges. I won't pretend otherwise. But the staff at Charlie Norwood were thorough, direct, and genuinely invested in getting my leg properly assessed and my treatment plan structured. The orthopedic team confirmed that the Fort Campbell injury had healed improperly in one area, a section of the tibia that required a corrective procedure. I was scheduled for outpatient surgery within 2 weeks. Physical therapy would follow for 6 to 8 months. With consistent rehabilitation, I was looking at a full functional recovery. I want to stop here and say something clearly. My parents drove me to every appointment. Every one. Charles sat in waiting rooms for hours without complaint. Ruth researched my medications, tracked my follow-up dates on a paper calendar she kept on the refrigerator, and made sure I ate properly throughout the recovery. They were 69 and 67 years old, and they were doing what I should have had a wife doing, without being asked, without keeping score. I want to talk about what Nicole had actually done with the money, because understanding it fully is part of understanding why this story matters beyond my particular circumstances. Stephen's investigation, which included a forensic review of the joint account records I authorized and a property assessment his paralegal compiled, showed the following. Over the 3 years between 2020 and 2023, Nicole had made withdrawals totaling approximately $186,000 from our joint account. The money had gone into 3 places. First, the house on Marlow Road, which she had renovated extensively, new kitchen, Primary bath remodel, back deck addition, landscaping. Stephen estimated the renovation costs at between $70,000 and $85,000. The house, as a result, had appreciated significantly from its 2018 purchase price of $295,000. Current market value, approximately $440,000, half of which was mine. Second, a personal account in Nicole's name only, opened in 2020 at a credit union in Decatur, into which she had transferred $62,000 over 3 years. This account, discovered during credit report review, had been unknown to me. Third, expenses Stephen could only describe as lifestyle expenditures, travel, furniture, and charges consistent with maintaining two people's social lives. Nicole had not been alone during those 3 years. The man Sandra had seen at the house was a person she'd been with since at least early 2021. 2 years before I came home, she had been planning a life with someone else, using the money I sent home from Fort Campbell. Nicole's attorney reached out to Stephen in December 2023, 10 days after we filed for divorce in DeKalb County Superior Court. The attorney's opening position was that the house had been purchased and maintained primarily through Nicole's labor and management during my long absence, and that her emotional and practical burden during 10 years of a military marriage entitled her to a larger share of the marital estate. Stephen forwarded me the letter. I read it twice. Emotional burden. The woman who'd locked the door on a man with a cane and a broken leg was citing emotional burden. I told Stephen to respond with every bank allotment record going back to August 2013. Every transfer, every month, the full $370,000 paper trail documented by Army pay records and joint account deposits. Let's show the court, I told him, exactly who carried what in this marriage. Stephen smiled, the tight professional smile of a man who likes having good paperwork. Already pulled it, he told me. By January 2024, I was 6 weeks post-surgery on the leg, walking without a cane for the first time since September, and sleeping in my childhood bedroom in Kirkwood while a judge in DeKalb County reviewed the financial history of my marriage. Life had taken a turn I hadn't planned for, but it was moving. And movement, after 10 years of overseas rotations, felt like the right direction regardless of where it was going. The physical therapy was at a clinic on Flat Shoals Avenue in Decatur, 3 sessions a week with a therapist named Marcus, who had worked with post-military patients for 12 years and had the cheerful relentlessness of someone who genuinely enjoyed watching people get better against their will. My right leg was rebuilding, slowly, but the trajectory was upward, and upward was what I needed. My parents continued doing what they did. Charles fixed things around the house and drove me to appointments, and occasionally appeared in the doorway of my room in the evenings with a cup of coffee and sat in the chair by the window and just kept me company without requiring anything from the silence. Ruth cooked and researched and tracked everything on her paper calendar and occasionally told me things about nutrition and sleep hygiene that I received with the patience of a man who understood she was doing it out of love and had the medical credentials too. Back it up. I had, by February 2024, been living in my parents' house for 3 months. I want to be honest about what that does to a 44-year-old man. It is not comfortable. It is not what you imagined for yourself at this age. The room is smaller than you remembered. The walls are the same color they were when you were 17. And there is something about eating breakfast at the table where you grew up that requires a particular kind of surrender, a setting down of the story you'd been telling about who you were and what your life was supposed to look like by now. But here is what I also know. Surrender is not the same as defeat. And the people across the breakfast table from you every morning, the ones who open the door at 11:15 p.m., without a single question, those people are not a consolation prize. They are the foundation. The divorce was finalized on March 18, 2024. I was 44 years old. The settlement, negotiated over 3 months and shaped substantially by the Army pay records Stephen had compiled, was as follows. The house on Marlow Road was to be sold. Of the net proceeds after mortgage payoff, I received 60%, approximately $86,000 after legal fees, in recognition of my disproportionate financial contribution to the marital estate. The $62,000 in Nicole's personal credit union account was classified as dissipated marital assets. I received $31,000 as my share. Stephen also successfully argued for a judgment against Nicole for $24,000 in documented unexplained withdrawals that could not be tied to marital expenses. Total recovery: approximately $141,000, not $370,000. Not even close to $370,000. Georgia's equitable distribution system is not a full restitution mechanism. It's a fairness calculation. And fairness in the law is a different animal from justice in the gut. Stephen was honest with me about that from the beginning. You're not getting it all back, he'd said, but you're getting recognized. The court will see what you contributed. The court saw it. I'm not going to tell you that number fixed everything. It didn't. You cannot fully recover, on a spreadsheet, 10 years of your life. What you can do is close the chapter cleanly, with your name on the right side of the record, and move forward with the knowledge that the truth got told somewhere official. Nicole signed the settlement documents without a court appearance. I did not see her. I did not want to. In April 2024, 6 months after I'd knocked on the door on Harwell Drive at 11:15 at night, my physical therapist Marcus cleared me for full weight-bearing activity without restriction. I walked out of the clinic on Flat Shoals Avenue and stood on the sidewalk in the April Atlanta afternoon. The dogwoods along the street were blooming, white and pink in the warm air, and I walked to my father's car, without a cane, for the first time in 7 months. Charles was waiting at the curb. He watched me walk toward him without saying anything. When I got to the car, he looked at my gait, the deliberate, unhurried walk of a man whose body had been repaired and knew it. And he nodded once. Good, he said. That was all. Just good. From Charles Walker, that word carried more than most people's paragraphs. I want to tell you about the conversations I had with my parents during those 6 months in the house on Harwell Drive, because they are the part of this story that I think about most. Not the divorce, not the money, not the locked door in Decatur. The evenings at the kitchen table on Harwell Drive, when the three of us had finished dinner and nobody was in a hurry to be anywhere else. The way my father talked about his years at the Ford plant, not with nostalgia, but with the level-headed precision of a man who had shown up every day and done the work and found a kind of dignity in that which had nothing to do with anyone else's recognition of it. The way my mother talked about her years as a school nurse, the children she'd seen through injuries and illnesses, and the occasional crisis that had nothing to do with physical health, and how she'd learned, over 22 years, that showing up consistently was the most underrated thing a person could do for someone else. They had been showing up consistently for me for 44 years. I had just been too far away, geographically, emotionally, to see it properly. I asked my father one evening in February, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, the Atlanta night quiet outside the Kirkwood windows, why he hadn't pushed me harder to stay in touch during the deployments, why he and Ruth hadn't made more noise about Nicole in the years when something was clearly going wrong. He thought about it for a long time before answering. Because you're a grown man, he finally said, and grown men make their own choices. My job wasn't to manage your marriage. It was to be here when you needed us. He paused. We were always going to be here, James. We just needed you to knock. I had knocked. At 11:15 at night on a bad leg with nothing left, and the door had opened. Here is what I want every person listening to take from this story. Because this isn't just a story about a bad marriage, or a financial betrayal, or a soldier who came home to a locked door. This is a story about what we take for granted when things are going well, and what we rediscover when they aren't. My parents were never glamorous. They were never dramatic. They didn't call me every week demanding attention or manufacturing crises that required me to fly home. They were just there, quietly, reliably, in a 2-story colonial on Harwell Drive in Kirkwood, in the way that bedrock is there. You don't notice bedrock when you're building on it. You only notice it when everything built on top of it has shifted and you need something solid under your feet. Nicole had a locked door. My parents had an open one. In the end, that was the only distinction that mattered. I have been thinking, lately, about what comes next. I am 45 years old. My leg works. The settlement check is in a savings account at a credit union on Moreland Avenue in Kirkwood. I have a VA disability rating that entitles me to ongoing health care and a monthly benefit that, combined with my savings, gives me a runway to figure out what the next chapter looks like. I have been talking to Stephen Watts about using the Army logistics experience to consult for distribution operations in the Atlanta metro area. The same work I did at that warehouse in Conley before I enlisted, but at a different level, with 10 years of military supply chain management behind it. I have not started dating. I'm not in a hurry. What I am doing is eating breakfast every morning at the table on Harwell Drive and helping Charles with the yard on weekends and driving Ruth to her church women's group on Tuesday evenings and finding, in those ordinary and unremarkable rhythms, something that I didn't have a word for until recently. The word is home. Not a building, not an address, the thing that opens the door at 11:15 at night without a single question. I knocked, and it opened. That's the whole story, and it's enough. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely.